Ladies and gentlemen, welcome wrestling fans worldwide to Knoxville and the Great Smoky Mountains for the Ron Fuller, Tennessee Studcast.
6 feet 9 inches tall, 265 pounds.
This historic podcast from one of the most respected and successful wrestlers and promoters will follow the footsteps of the largest and oldest wrestling family on the planet.
Listen to what I'm saying. That's right. Bring that camera in here a little bit closer.
Through 93 years and 4 generations.
The stud has arrived.
Old school or new fan, this unique broadcast will educate and captivate as Ron details decades of professional wrestling's growth with truly unforgettable stories.
I want those people out there at home to hear the stud.
Sit back and enjoy the ride with the Tennessee Stud.
The Tennessee Stud. You will learn that name. You will remember it.
And now,
the stud is here.
All right, here we go. Once again, it's David Summers, and here comes another Studcast with the Tennessee Stud, Ron Fuller. This is the story of wrestling in America as told by the Stud, whose family started the profession over 100 years ago. So now, let's step back into the ring, back into time. Let's get wall-to-wall, treetop tall with the Tennessee Stud, Ron Fuller. Hey, Ron, what's going on in your world?
Oh, geez, man. Kind of digging out, you know. A lot of places around me pretty close are still having problems, and roads are down, and pretty amazing, man, what happened with one little hurricane. Well, I shouldn't say a little hurricane.
Yeah. Wow.
I guess it's turned into something much bigger than that. But we're going to talk a little bit about that. So
yeah, it's incredible how we thought, I hope the hurricane doesn't hit us. We got a tremendous amount of rain here in southeast Alabama, but we were farther to the west, fortunately, and it only rain came here. But man, through Georgia and portions of South Carolina, it is incredible what has happened to those folks, and the stories are beginning to come out. So, and it's kind of funny because you have the word hurricane. It's not funny, but you have the word hurricane in the title today. You know, we talked a few minutes before we started recording, as we do most times with every Studcast, but today is a little different than most. Something very horrendous happened last Friday, as we just said. We had a hurricane that hit our country named Helene. So I know you would like to say a few things about that before we get started. As I mentioned, we saw so much is beginning to come out now, and we're beginning to really see the pictures from all of that, Stud.
Yeah, I know, man. And I never normally in a Studcast talk about recent events, but wow, this latest insanely powerful hurricane, man, hit a little close to home for me. And, I kind of want to explain a little of that on the start of our show today. And I believe, Elaine, this hurricane is going to go down as one of the most destructive hurricanes in maybe our country's history. Mm-hmm. And I hear him say now basically that it may be the second strongest in the last 50 years, only behind Katrina, so far as, I guess, death and destruction. But, and it concerns this part of the country where I live now, and then it's also concerns the part of the country where my territories were named after, Southeastern, and they'd pretty well racked the Southeastern United States, and it seemed to have its sights set the entire time on my entire family. Not only my home, which is now in Tennessee, but it started down south there. Just in that Tampa area, and even below, actually, Fort Myers got some of it, and that's where my brother lives, and his wife, and it's pretty much his entire family, his daughters. He has 3 daughters. They live there, and all their children live there. So that thing started working its way north from there. Basically, it kind of tapped into Rob and his family, and then it started north and toward Atlanta, Georgia, and just miles. It got just miles from where my mother, who recently passed, where her side of the family lives. And she had two sisters. They're gone, but their families still live there. A little town called Locust Grove. And I used to live there myself, actually, in the late 1960s.
Mm-hmm.
And it's where I started wrestling in the 1970s. And in 1970, to be honest, right there at 1970. So, that little town's only a few miles away from where Mr. Olympia, Jerry Stubbs, was born and raised. And he still lives there.
Mm-hmm.
And Hurricane Helene brought him some problems, too, no doubt. And, it brought Category 2 winds at close to 100 miles an hour to Atlanta, Georgia.
Wow.
Which, gosh, who could have ever imagined that could possibly happen?
Yeah.
And then next it began to look like Helene was setting her sights on me up here in eastern Tennessee.
Mm-hmm.
So after delivering tremendous destruction in the western Carolinas, South Carolina, and North Carolina, it headed west across the Smoky Mountains, totally washed out parts of Interstate 40 between Asheville, North Carolina, and Knoxville. Just gone. And so on its way, there's more than 2 million homes that lost their electricity, and I'd say well over that. I heard a figure today that there's still 1 million that don't have electricity. And it got into parts of 6 states. It was in Florida, it was in Georgia, it was in South Carolina, North Carolina, and Tennessee, up there in Virginia.
Yeah.
And some of them are still underwater. Just now getting the water off the roads and back into the rivers where they used to be. And so, heck, I remember quite a bit of time lately here seeing whole houses floating down rivers, man.
Yeah.
It's just crazy.
Yeah.
So it got as near as 30 miles from where I live, man. I live actually about 5 miles from the French Broad River. And that's the river that just really, that had got Asheville, that got so many other places. And it overflowed its banks, and it washed out every bridge in a little tiny town called Greenville, about 40 miles from me. It washed out every bridge in that town. And then in Newport, which is only about 30 miles from me, it washed out their major bridge that divided that city.
Wow.
So, gosh, it left a 600-mile path, man, of destruction, man, with over 150 dead. And that figure's still going to rise.
Yeah.
And I've heard as many as maybe 600 missing still. So, so I kind of want to start off with a little bit, and God bless those that lost everything in that path, man, of this disaster. And after almost a week of seeing the destruction everywhere on TV, my heart and prayers go out to all of those that's been affected by it.
Well, most didn't realize how heavy this thing was going to come in. Most had no idea. And I tell you, this has certainly been a different way to begin a Studcast with everything that you've described and everything we've seen, the pictures, as we said earlier, coming out on TV now, and seeing the devastation and seeing entire homes. And you stop and think that is someone's home that is floating down the river or impacting that bridge. So it's just incredible what's happened there and how many are hurting. And a lot of folks are doing what they can to help those folks in that region. And that's a great thing. So, all right. So how are you going to follow something like this on today's ride for the Studcast?
Oh, man. I think I'm going to start by describing another type of disaster, a wrestling disaster that actually happened in East Tennessee.
Okay.
In this same part of the country I live in now, 44 years before Hurricane Helene. And as I said in the close of the last Studcast, we're going to be returning to Knoxville for more discussion of what the great fans there had gone through. And so we're going to discuss that with fans about, we're about to encounter the last part of 1980. That's where we are now. And at that point, we were experiencing those people up there in that part of the country, in that original Southeastern territory, at this point, we're experiencing their third territory owners in 1 year. So,
Wow.
So after that, we'll discuss another great Southeastern card, the third sellout card in a row. That territory was on fire. And in fact, from week to week, I can't figure out which one of these last few Southeastern cards were better. I keep thinking, wow, this was one of the best I've ever seen. And we got another one of those today. So, and this one, the one in this Studcast has 4 totally different kinds of matches in it. It had something for everybody, literally. And we'll cover the TV that promotes that, the results of the matches and the attendances in the 3 major markets. And then hopefully we'll have enough time for another learning tree question as well.
That'd be cool. So it sounds like another great one. So no wonder business was so bad in Knoxville. Fans were getting the third territory owners in less than a year. So how can fans survive something like that?
A good question. And what a pitiful story was taking place in that part of the country. For some of the best fans in the history of the sport, I think. I hardly know where to begin with this story. I guess after I sold to the Georgia promoters in October of 1979, I guess that's as good a place as any is to start this. So judging Jim Barnett's success in ending the Atlanta War in the early 1970s, and then immediately how he popped his own territory, I was pretty much convinced that he was the right guy to sell my company to, along with his Southeastern partner down there in Georgia as well, Fred Ward's success, who was running Macon in Columbus, Georgia, been there for decades. So I felt confident I was selling my territory to 2 of the best wrestling owners in America. And it was extremely important to me that the sale of this territory was going to provide the very best in wrestling to all those wonderful fans in my Southeastern territory that had supported and followed the sport so well. So well enough for promoters all over the world, basically, to start calling it the best little territory in the world. So I thought I've done a pretty good job there, and of keeping my ownership a secret for 5 years, which is really hard to do if you're around wrestling, that. So I doubt that probably more than 20 people in that part of the country, if they weren't associated with the wrestling business, they had no idea I was the owner of Southeastern Wrestling.
I don't know if I've ever heard you say anything about this particular subject before, Stud. So you're saying your ownership of Southeastern Wrestling in Tennessee was not widely known to fans at all?
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. And practically no one knew I owned Southeastern. So the same went for my second Southeastern territory down there on the Gulf Coast, based in Pensacola. Same for Continental, and the same with USA Wrestling Company. Extremely few people from 1974 through 1988, which basically covered my entire territory as an owner of a territory, that had any idea I was behind any of that. It was a total secret.
Mm-hmm.
So think about it, Dave. I mean, when those territories opened, I was actually a top heel in all 3 of them. When the first territory in Knoxville, definitely. I went down there to Pensacola. I was the top heel. Bob Armstrong was the top baby face. And everywhere except USA, which I didn't wrestle but one match while I owned USA. So imagine how many fans would have bought a ticket if they knew the main event heel that they were watching in the ring owned the wrestling company that they were supporting.
I don't think I've ever thought about it quite like that. So it really does make a lot of sense, though, Stud.
Well, what those thousands and thousands of wrestling fans and supporters of my Southeastern territory unknowingly did for me and my reputation among the other territory owners in the sport, basically they had them calling it the best little territory in the world. It was wonderful. what those fans did for me was wonderful and greatly appreciated, even though they didn't know that I was responsible for what was happening. And I owed it. I felt like I owed it to all the fans to get this sale right. And with the sale of my territory, I desperately wanted to return the favor that all these fans had done for me, making such a huge success out of my first territory. So when it became clear the Georgia promoters were definitely not going to do as well as I had anticipated, it greatly disappointed me. I felt like I had let thousands of fans who had supported me for years down by choosing to sell my company to the wrong people. It's like, gosh, man, what have I done here? So when the Georgia promoters sold out to Flair and Mulligan, who appeared to be, at that point, somewhat backed by the Crockett Mid-Atlantic wrestling family over there, I was absolutely ecstatic. This was wonderful. My gosh, I know this group of guys is going to make it happen. So crazy thing is, man, I did not find out most of the facts about that sale to Flair and Mulligan until basically, Dave, about 3 weeks ago. When I dealt with my friend Ed Harrison that helps me get old cards and things, and I realized a lot of things about that sale that I never knew. 44 years ago, wow, it's 44 years after I sold it, I finally find out a little bit about what that second sale was all about. And then looking back, there was nothing I could do to stop the sale. I didn't own it anymore.
Right.
So, so this kind of brings us up to the disastrous way that sale, the sale from the Georgia guys to Flair and Mulligan, was handled, especially the new owners. They weren't going to have a live event in Knoxville for 5 straight weeks after they bought the territory. And heck, I was always concerned about missing 1 week at a time, much less 5 in a row. So I absolutely hate what happened to the Knoxville Southeastern fans in the years between 1979 and when Flair and Mulligan failed as well and had to close their company down. So I had spent 5 years of my life, starting in 1974, getting guys over in my little Southeastern territory. And I guess I did such a good job of it that nobody could follow us. Georgia had great wrestlers. The Carolinas had great wrestlers. But fans in that part of the country, it seems like they fell in love with so many of the wrestlers that I had found, that most of which they would have never seen if I hadn't have found them. And they grew to love so many of these guys so strongly after that they stopped being fans for other territories. And after those guys disappeared, they kind of quit enjoying wrestling, it seemed like.
Wow.
So, and I'm talking about a lot of guys here. I'm talking about the Mongolian Stomper, Joe Leduc. These are all people that I brought that they had never seen. Joe Leduc, Bob Armstrong, Tora Tanaka, Robert, Jimmy, Tony Charles, Ronnie Garvin, Dale Lewis, Danny Haw, Kevin Sullivan, Don Carson, David Schultz, Jerry Stubbs, Bob Orton Jr., The Assassin, Jody Hamilton, Norvell Austin, Gorgeous George Jr., Crusher Blackwell.
Wow.
And me, so there's a lot of dudes there that they had never seen, probably would have never seen.
Yeah.
And I think they never forgot them.
Yeah.
So basically the downfall began with the Knoxville War. It got worse with the first sale to the Georgia promoters. And sadly, it got worse still with the Flair and Blackjack Mulligan years. And after they were gone, it finally collapsed entirely. Somewhere around 1983, there was no wrestling in one of the greatest markets that had ever been for many years. So business was so bad, no television station would put anyone associated with the sport on the air and give them a wrestling show anymore. Imagine that, Dave. Wow. After the 4 years from 1975 to 1979, when Southeastern Wrestling every Saturday was the most watched hour on any of the stations in that city, from sign on in the morning to prime time that night.
Oh, I absolutely believe that. I mean, it's hard to believe, but it's true. I mean, how could any sport lose its fan base that fast and to that extent?
Well, it just seemed like the fans really, Dave. I don't think that they didn't disappear. They were still there, but obviously they were unhappy with the product that they were being given, and I think they were waiting on somebody to maybe bring back the good old days, man. And that didn't happen for 2 more years until 1985. 1985, we had changed Southeastern into Continental. Found out that Knoxville had no television shows, no wrestling on TV in that market because it had been killed so bad. Put the show back in there, and what a tremendous show that was, that Southeastern show. And then we went back to Knoxville, and what we did is we brought in all those older guys. The guys, a lot of those guys I just mentioned a minute ago, came back, man, and how good, it just brought back memories, I think, for those fans of how good it once was to be a wrestling fan.
Wow, I love the story, even though I never saw a wrestling event in Knoxville. The real heartwarming homecoming in 1985 for both wrestlers and fans finally sold out the Knoxville Coliseum again. And I think that was like for the first time in maybe 7 years.
Yes, yeah, that's exactly right.
Wow.
7 years, then and for about 4 years straight in that Coliseum, we sold out almost every week from 75 to 79.
Yeah.
And then, so it was a really a great homecoming, coming back, and so it was just the first sellout, Dave, with many more to come. When we went back, first one sold out, and it seemed like they all sold out after that. So it was kind of the rebirth of Knoxville wrestling as one of the greatest wrestling cities ever.
Yeah, I got to say that again. You guys made Knoxville one of the greatest wrestling cities ever, no doubt about it. And what a great way to end this opening segment today. All right, are you ready to move on? And as we head to the Southeastern card of the week, down on the Gulf Coast, let's go to the 3rd week of September in 1980. What do you say?
All right. Heck yes, man. So the opening match on this card, another great card, was Ricky Gibson, and he was going to be wrestling who fans felt like down in that Gulf Coast area. I called him the evil one, Billy Spears. I mean, Billy Spears had tons of heat. They hated him, and he was an evil guy, literally, it turned out. Wow. And Norvell Austin was going to face Sweet Brown Sugar in the second match. Big Ron Bass was going to be going up against the very popular Charlie Cook, who was actually a heck of a wrestler as well as a great pro football player. Next match on the card was Plowboy Frazier against my brother Rob. And this was not your normal match. In fact, I'm going to save all the other things that I want to say about this match because there was so much added to this one match. I'm going to save it until we get to the TV show because it is part of the personality. It is the personality profile and the television show we're going to be talking about later here. So then the 5th match on that card was an I Quit match for the United States Junior Heavyweight Championship. It was between the new champion, who is Jerry Stubbs. He just won it back from Tony Charles the week before, and he was going to be facing Tony again for the title in an I Quit match. 6th match on that card was for the Southeastern Championship. This is a special event. It was going to be a 2 out of 3 fall match. We were going back 20 years, man, to put this one together, and I was going to be wrestling the champion, the Mongolian Stomper, managed by the Big C. The last match of the night is going to be for the Southeastern Tag Championship. The champions, Bob Armstrong and Joe Leduc, were going to be wrestling against Big C and his new partner, Big C 2.
It is hard to believe, but this could be the best one of the last 3 Southeastern cards. It sounds great. It's a good place for us to take a break. Let's do that. And when we return, we're going to find out what was on the TV show to promote this great card and what happened in the arenas. All that is coming up when this Studcast continues. Hey, Studcast fans, Ron has asked me to pass along some information to all of his fans and listeners. He's been working very hard on ways to improve his Studcast and also setting up a new streaming channel that will also include everything that he's been able to find concerning his wrestling companies. The new Studcast, when they begin, hopefully in November of this year, will have an upgrade in every way. He wants you to know how much he appreciates your support over the last 7 years since he came back into wrestling and looks forward to the future. Thanks to everyone. All right, Studcast fans, welcome back in. Let's get into the second half of this Studcast. We've got a really good one. This one is called Hurricane, Knoxville Pain, and Roberts Gain. Okay, no pun intended. Yeah, maybe there is a pun intended. All right, so let's get started. You and Rob, as bookers, had a great card to cover in this TV show. So set it up for us, Stud. How did it open up?
Well, this one opened up with Charlie Platt, and the new United States Junior Heavyweight Champion, Jerry Stubbs, was with him at the set. Jerry had his belt, and obviously he was bragging about how good it was to get his belt back. And he said, he was so happy about it. He said, I'm going to defend my belt here, Charlie, on TV today. I just want to do it for all my fans out there, which he didn't have many actually at that point, So he said, yeah, and he says, I want to do it on the last match of the TV because I'm the main event always, and I always should be. As usual, Jerry went through his bragging thing, and the fans were, he said he ended up saying fans are going to get a close look at a real champion, and no longer that limey from England, Tony Charles, but a good old American boy. So the studio crowd, they weren't too impressed with it, and they booed him pretty heavily as he left the set. And so Charlie welcomed his next 2 guests to the show. And the studio crowd liked these 2, boy, and they exploded because it was Joe Leduc and Bob Armstrong. And they came to the set, and they had their Southeastern Tag Team belts with them. And they were there to talk about their upcoming first title defense since they won the belts from Ron Bass and Randy Rose 2 weeks earlier, because they had been in these single matches against those same 2 guys. So this was their first title defense. So Charlie led them beautifully, which he was so good at, by introducing their opponents. He said, well, guys, I'm glad y'all are out here right now because I'm going to let you take a look at your opponents for your very first title defense. Mm-hmm. And it was a new team that had never wrestled on TV before there. And they were going to be getting a shot at the champion's belt. I'm talking about Big C1 and his new partner, Jerry Roberts, a tremendous tag team wrestler that had been in with so many good tag teams. We had picked him up, and the Big C, he fit perfect in with the Big C and his stuff. So you can just imagine what reception those 2 guys got.
Oh, I guarantee you it was not a huge rousing welcome from the fans for that. All right, so this was really different. I mean, both teams were basically new to each other, really in every way. So how did this opening match go?
Well, it was actually fantastic. I mean, these guys made a great team, and Big C had chosen the perfect partner. Under his match, both of them wore the exact same match as Big C had. And under his mask, Jerry Brown was, like I mentioned, one of the best tag team wrestlers in history. And actually, he was one of the former Hollywood Blondes. We're tag team champions in Florida way back when I wrestled in Florida. And at that point, he was teamed with a guy named Buddy Roberts, who's going to go on to be a Freebird. So, I mean, there's a good connection here with some great talent. So the Big C was certainly no stranger to tag wrestling, and he had held a lot of tag team championship belts. And so this new team was was in their very first match ever together, actually, on TV. And wow, there's Bob and Leduc. They're sitting there watching this match, and me and Rob were like, they were blown away. They were like, wow, these guys are good, man. They've never wrestled together, and look at this. So they were almost speechless, and at what they saw. So they had both, and several had individual matches. Like I said, after winning the belts, and Leduc had been wrestling for a couple of weeks against Ron Bass, Bob Armstrong, against Randy Rose. And both of those guys were former Southeastern champions before they started wrestling against them individually. So Bob basically had just beaten Randy Rose the week before in a loser league pole match. And the week before, where the Big C and his new partner, managed by Big C's black, Big C had his black glove taken away by Bob Armstrong, and they put the glove on top of the pole. And, so on this match, whoever brought it down basically got to keep it. And so, and the loser had to leave. So pretty darned important match. That had Bob and Joe, looking forward. They said at the end of this, after the Big C's, both of them won their match, they said, well, we're looking forward to this. We want to wrestle a great team, and this is a great team. So as soon as the mask guys won the match, they left the ring. But instead of going to the dressing room, they came straight to the set. And they confronted Bob and Joe right there at the set with Charlie. And they started screaming to Joe and Bob that they were going to be the shortest tag team champions in Southeastern history, because we're going to take the belts the very first time we wrestle you. So it's kind of an in-your-face deal for Bob and Joe. And they saw things a little differently, and they started around the desk, and Charlie was pretty quick. He had to be at this point. He had a lot of guys that he had to deal with, and some of them were you never knew where they were headed. So Charlie had to throw it to a commercial break. And they went just before the four of them got into it. So they didn't see, fans in the studio saw the little altercation, but nobody at home got to see it.
Well, Charlie always had that kind of ace in the hole. He could throw it to a break at any time if he thought he needed to, and he would definitely take advantage of that. I mean, that really, it should be quite a tag match the following week as part of that great card. Okay, so who was on next?
Well, Charlie Cook was in the ring, man, and his upcoming opponent the next week was going to be Ron Bass. Ron Bass came to the set with Charlie. Charlie was getting visitors for just about every one of these matches. And Bass had a little bit to say about Cook. His opponent the following week, he didn't really want to talk about Charlie Cook, but he had a whole lot to say about Bob Armstrong, because him and Bob had been into it for a couple of weeks there. So Charlie was a great wrestler. Charlie was a great athlete, as a matter of fact. And he had some great years as an NFL linebacker for the Pittsburgh Steelers, so he was showing his skills off as Ron Bass is talking about not him, but Bob Armstrong while he's wrestling. And Bass accused Bob of illegally defeating his former partner, Randy Rose, the week before in the pole match. And that sent Randy Rose, his good friend, out of Southeastern. He's gone from the territory, and he told Charlie, he says, and I promised Randy that I'm going to take care of Bob Armstrong for him. I'm going to finish Bob Armstrong's career, basically. So about that time, Charlie Cook, who's in the ring, he can't hear what's going on at the set. He hit his opponent with a football tackle that sent him flying through the ropes and out on the concrete, man. And Cook had to go get him. He couldn't get up. The guy about knocked him out. He went and grabbed him and he threw him back in the ring and he covered him and got a 3 count. And so, it appeared to Rob and I that Bass better pay a little more attention to Charlie Cook than Bob Armstrong at this point, because he's going to be having to wrestle him.
All right, so this was a very good TV at this point. You said earlier when you were running down the card, there was going to be a special personality profile about the upcoming match between your brother Robert and Plowboy Frazier, and it was going to be on this TV show.
Yeah. So, and that, we're at this point now in the show. We're after the second match. We're at the personality profile segment, and but thanks for picking up on it. So we're going to talk a little bit about this match between Rob and Frazier. And Charlie had 3 guests on the profile with him for this profile. He had Rob sitting in a chair on one side of him. On the other side of him was Plowboy Frazier, and standing behind Plowboy was Floyd. And Floyd had a hat on his head, right? Because he had got his head shaved along with Plowboy the week before, because they lost a big match in which Rob and them are basically still going after the $5,000. And so Rob was sitting there. He had a box and sitting in his lap. So Charlie began, by getting a promise, first of all, from all 3 of them, that they weren't going to have any problem here on the set, and they all agreed. So Charlie opened the profile, and then he showed a video right off the bat, the end of the last match between Rob and Plowboy. That was the one where the winner got the $5,000, and they had the other stipulations in that match. And there were special stipulations in if Plowboy lost, that he was going to have to shave his head, and Floyd was going to have his head shaved. But if Rob lost, he was going to have to leave Southeastern. Well, Plowboy lost. So the studio fans are sitting on the bleachers right there next to the profile set. The studio's kind of small and compact. And they had not seen, some of them had not seen this match. So they were basically on the edge of their seats because they didn't know who won the match. And all those people at home that didn't go to the buildings, they had no idea who won this match either. So Rob got the victory, and he got a huge hand from the studio audience. And the video showed a packed building full of people. We had all 3 of those major buildings sold out the week before. And so we had sellout crowds, and wow, the building looked tremendous, and they're cheering Rob too. And then they got to see him shave his head and a little bit. So they showed parts of the barber shaving Plowboy's head and then Floyd's. And so then the studio fans were going nuts at this point. But so was Plowboy and Floyd. They didn't want them to show that last part about the shaving of the heads, and so they started screaming at the fans in the bleachers and for the production crew up in the top to stop the video, but they didn't. They ran ahead. Wayne Register running the business, running things up there. He said, "Oh well, we got to show this." Yeah. So in the week following this match, Plowboy had gone as soon as the match was over. A day or 2 later, he had contacted Don Curtis, the Southeastern commissioner, and he was trying to convince Don that he'd been cheated out of the $5,000 prize money, and that it was supposed to be awarded to the winner. And then now after he supposedly lost the match, which I think is the way he put it, that they cut his hair off and they shaved Floyd's head too, and he said, besides losing the money, I don't look very good anymore, and Floyd's ugly. And he said he definitely deserved. He said, I guess he gave Curtis a story, and basically a little whining story. And at the end, he said, I think I definitely deserve another shot at that money. And he said, I'm willing to do about anything to get it. So Don Curtis was on a special hookup. It was a live hookup from a Jacksonville television station. And so he had seen the part of the profile too. And he told basically the story of what Plowboy had told him. And he said, basically kind of turned it over to Rob. He said, that Robert's fuller of money. And he says, it's up to him. If he wants to risk the $5,000, that's up to him. I'm not going to make him do that. So Rob quickly agreed to put up the money. And Rob had been, I guess, anticipating this. And he said, under 3 conditions. He said, I will put up the $5,000, Plowboy. And Plowboy's sitting right there on the other side of Charlie. Mm-hmm. He said, but I want 3 things to happen. He said, the first thing is Floyd is not going to be allowed at ringside at all. And then he said, and then second, he says, if you lose, he said, you're going to have to give me $2,500 of your money in cash. It's going to cost you $2,500 instead of winning the 5. You could lose $2,500 of your own money. And the studio liked that one, boy. They popped. And then came the third condition. And Rob said, he says, Plowboy, if you lose, you're going to have to wear a woman's dress to the ring every night from then on, as long as you're wrestling. So the studio exploded on that one. And they were like, whoa, that's a good one. So, but it didn't explode nearly as bad as Plowboy and Floyd. Wow, they started screaming, oh, no, absolutely not. No, we ain't going to do that, But Rob just sat there, and then Charlie was like, well, guys, now, you sure? And finally they talked about it, and they got their heads together, and then they came back and said, all right, we'll do it. So we're off to a pretty decent profile, right? So.
All right, so I think you have said that Plowboy was like 6'10", maybe. I mean, he was gigantic. So I was trying to picture him in a dress, and I'm just going to stop doing that. So I don't want to see that. I can't even imagine where you find a dress for somebody that enormous. All right, I got to see if I got this straight. Robert putting up $5,000 he had won the week before. If Rob lost, the Plowboy got the $5,000, but Plowboy had 3 conditions to meet before the deal was done. He was going to have Floyd, could not have Floyd anywhere near the ring or in his corner. And if he lost, he had to give Robert of his own money $2,500 in cash, plus wear a dress to the ring for every event the Plowboy was in from that night on, as long as he wrestled in Southeastern wrestling. Okay, that's a lot. Did I get all that right? And I would have loved to have been there to see that.
Good job.
So I got it right?
Yes, you did. Right. So Don Curtis, he's still there in that hookup from Jacksonville, and he's seeing what's going on. And as soon as Plowboy and them said, okay, we'll do it, Don Curtis said, okay, it's a done deal. Well, that was the end of the deal for Don. He was off the screen. He was out of it. So Rob opened up the box that had been sitting there in his lap for the entire profile. And, I guess he was prepared for if they would accept the deal. And he stood up and he pulled out of the box a huge, huge is the right word. It was a red and white flowered dress. Oh, it was horrible. It was horrible, right? And that got the biggest pop of the whole thing, man. And he threw the dress in Plowboy's lap, right? And then he reached up there, and Floyd had a cap on because he didn't want to show his head shave. Rob reached up there and he slapped Floyd's cap off his head, and he came to the dressing room. And that building went crazy. So did Plowboy and Floyd.
Yeah, I bet. I've been saying it for a while. These profiles just keep getting better and better, but this one may be one of the best ever. All right, so how do you follow something like that, Stud?
Well, man, you followed that, I guess, with the Mongolian Stomper was in the next deal, and you know what that was all about. I mean, he came busting out of the dressing room door. He was like he was Plowboy.
Right.
He was on a mission, and he attacked as usual the studio crowd. Man, he hit those bleachers, and everybody went every direction, and it happened so fast. I was back in the back watching the monitor, and I was afraid somebody's going to get hurt. I mean, people were jumping off the tops of the bleachers, and it was like and Stomper's going nuts. So then the Big C finally got out there, and he corralled his monster, and he got him back to the ring for the next TV match. And so I went down and joined Charlie at the set, and wanted to be talking about my upcoming best 2 out of 3 fall championship match with the Stomper, basically, during this match. And it was a typical Mongolian Stomper TV match. Short, but certainly not sweet. There was nothing sweet about the Stomper.
Right.
And he was like a machine in the ring, man. And he was having an upcoming old-time best 2 out of 3 fall match with him. I had that scheduled, and I'll be honest with you, that was something I wasn't looking forward to, man. Stomper's in great shape, and a 3 fall deal. Wow. So Charlie and I didn't have long to talk about it, though, because Stomper did as usual, man. He did exactly what his name indicated. He stomped the guy's face off, and then, Big C had to pull him off of the guy, and the guy laid there, man, got hauled out. And that poor job boy earned his money. I can tell you that. Gee, my knee. I mean, Stomper I thought he crushed his skull.
He was a scary human being. He was absolutely huge. It was so funny the way the crowd freaked out every time he came in the studio. All right, you couldn't have paid me enough money to get in the ring with that monster. All right, I guess it was time, as promised by Stubbs on the opening of the show, for Jerry to defend his newly won United States Junior Heavyweight Championship belt. How about that?
Yeah, it was, man. And it didn't take long for Stubbs to regret his little run in his mouth at the beginning of the show, that he was going to defend his belt on TV. And he was in the ring, and then out of the dressing room came Norvell Austin. I mean, I don't think Stubbs was expecting to get that type of an opponent, right? And so Stubbs jumped out of the ring, and he ran straight to the set with Charlie. And he says, "Wait a minute, Charlie Platt." He goes, "Why didn't I get an opponent like the Stomper just wrestled?" Because, well, why am I having to defend my belt on TV against somebody as good as Norvell Austin? I mean, so he's trying to basically get out of it. So, and Charlie had a heck of an answer for him, man. He popped to people. He said, "Jerry," he says, "you're the one that asked to defend your belt on TV today, didn't you?"
Mm-hmm.
And he said, "If you're afraid of Norvell, then get in the ring and do what you said you wanted to do when the TV show started. Defend your belt." So Charlie got himself over, man. Studio audience, I think that was probably the biggest pop of the day. So Stubbs, he hesitated, and he finally went back to the ring. And when he got up on the apron of the ring, Norvell just went and grabbed him, and he flipped him over the top rope, and he went to work on him, man. The bell rang. And the fans, boy, they were treated to one of the best TV matches of the year. What a match these guys had. And Norvell dominated him. Norvell kicked Jerry Stubbs' butt. And the match ended as the TV time ran out. On the end of the show, they had to ring the bell, and it ended up what was called a draw.
Wow. All right, a fantastic TV show, no doubt. New team, Big C 1 and 2, They got a win. Charlie Cook and the Mongolian Stomper both got wins. Norvell Austin put his name in contention for Jerry Stubbs' belt, and the personality profile was, I think you would call, epic, no doubt. All right, so take us to the live events in the three major markets for the following week and set those up for us, Stud.
Okay, that situation between Ricky Gibson and Sweet Brown Sugar that we talked about, I think it's about two Studcasts back, was still a problem, you know, and me and Rob had intentionally kept these two guys apart because they didn't like each other, and it just we didn't know really how to handle it. I'd never seen that situation quite like it. So on the opening match of this card, which was in the third week of September 1980, was Ricky Gibson, like I mentioned earlier, against Billy Spears, who was he was himself pretty controversial, no doubt about it. So Sweet Brown Sugar, of his own volition, decides to take the problem between him and Gibson to the next level during this match. He's in the second match, and he went from a work to a shoot, and without discussion, he went down and got into the ring and jumped Ricky Gibson, and Spears just stood there watching like, what the heck is going on here, and busted his eye, hit him and busted his eye, went back to the dressing room. And it was like, what in the heck? So then the second match on the card was Norvell Austin against Sweet Brown Sugar. And so Ricky Gibson decided to return the favor. And during the course of this match, Ricky went down. It's kind of an eye for an eye, I guess you'd say. You know, so without saying anything to anybody, Ricky hit the ring on Brown Sugar, and he busted Brown Sugar's eyes.
Wow. All right. Have you ever seen anything like that before, Stud? I mean, how did you guys handle that situation?
Oh, well, you know, I'd never seen anything like that before. So I had a couple of days later, I had to sit down with both of them, and I told them, you know, that I didn't want any more of that, you know, and I said, you know, if you can't get along with each other and you think you got to do that anymore, I said, I got no place for you. So he said, so I said to him, you know, I think if that's the case, he says, I told him, I said, I'm going to book the first ever shoot, lose or leave match in my own territory here. You two against each other, and y'all bust each other all you want, right? And, you know, I'll do it in the next card in just one city. I ain't going to put you together but one time. And you know, and I said, and the winner of the match can stay, and the loser leaves the territory. You know, wow. And I said, you guys just think about it.
All right,
talk to each other, or you can just wait and talk to me.
All right. So what did they say, and what did you end up actually doing?
Well, I think I'm going to save some of this for next week, you know, because we got a whole lot still to cover here in this particular show. And I'll tell everybody what happened next week. I mean, it was kind of crazy. I'd never experienced this before. I'd never seen anything like this happen in somebody's territory. And so we let's get back to the rest of the card, and we'll talk about what happened in that next week. So in the third match on this card, you had Ron Bass. He got a win over Charlie Cook. Then we get to the $5,000 return match, basically, between Robert and Plowboy Frazier. Plowboy showed up down there with his $2,500 in cash, you know, and you know, that in case he lost, he was prepared to do what he was supposed to do. Floyd came down to the ring with Plowboy, so that wasn't part of the deal. So they didn't have the dress Rob had given him. So Rob said, you know, I gave you, they got on the microphone. He said, I gave you a dress that you had to wear if you didn't win this match. And he said, Floyd's here and he's not supposed to be here. He said, send him back to the dressing room and then have somebody bring that dress back. So that's what happened. Floyd before he went back to the dressing room, and he stayed there. And, and he was told by the announcer, if you show back up here, you're never going to be in Southeastern anymore. You're gone for good if you return to the ring. So that match was a pretty good match, man. I mean, Rob and Plowboy, I was really surprised. Rob did really, really good against Plowboy. Plowboy in this one, though, actually busted Rob open, but Rob won the match, and he got the $2,500 in cash, and Plowboy had to put the dress on, and
Oh my God.
and when he did, wow, you can imagine what the building did, and then he tromped off to the dressing room wearing his beautiful dress.
Well,
So Jerry Stubbs in the next one, the United States Junior Heavyweight belt at stake. I quit match with Tony Charles, and Stubbs was able to win that match. He kept his belt. Then in the best 2 out of 3 falls Southeastern Championship match between me and the Stomper, who was managed by the Big C, I won basically in 2 straight falls. But I won both of them by disqualification. Big C hit me in the first fall and got disqualified, got my hand raised. And by golly, he hit me in the second fall with the glove again. And they ended up having to carry me back to the dressing room.
Wow.
But I had won. But I couldn't win the championship because it was by disqualification. So then the last match of the night was the Southeastern Tag Championship. The champions, Armstrong, Bob Armstrong, Joe Leduc, defending against Big C 1 and 2. Wow, I didn't see any of this match, but Rob said it was absolutely tremendous. Both of those teams were so good. Rob said that it ended up with Ron Bass making good on his TV. He had talked and told basically Charlie Platt that, I'm going to get even for my buddy Randy Rose, and I'm going to take care of Bob Armstrong. So in this match, at the end of this match, the referee got knocked down, and he was laying face down in the ring. Joe Leduc and Big C1 was out the outside of the ring going at it. Bob Armstrong put his sleeper on Big C2 in the middle of the ring. And here came Ron Bass with his bull rope. And he got in the ring behind Bob. Bob never saw him coming. And he literally rung Bob's bell, man, with that big old huge cowbell, that was attached to his rope. And Armstrong was knocked out, went down face first. Bass rolled Armstrong over on his back. He pulled Big C2, who Armstrong had just about put to sleep, over and put him on top of Bob, and he left the ring. Referee never saw him. Referee came around, crawled over there, and he counted Bob out. So Bob and Joe lost their Southeastern Tag Championships, just like Big C said, in the very first time they ever wrestled these guys. So Ron Bass and the Mongolian Stomper had to come back to the ring to get them to the dressing room. The police was having a problem with the fans. And So to get them back to the dressing room, Bass, Stomper went back. The cops got around them, and that happened in 3 cities.
Wow, it sounds like one of the most exciting nights of wrestling maybe ever. A shoot in the first 2 matches between 2 guys that had a problem with each other for quite a while. All right, so Plowboy Frazier having to wear a dress for the first time, Jerry Stubbs retaining his U.S. Junior title, you winning 2 straight falls, but still no belt, and Joe Leduc and Bob Armstrong losing their Southeastern tag belts in the first week of championship competition. I mean, in the first week. So what about the attendance in the 3 major cities? That's a big card, so I know you guys had to do well.
Well, hey, business was crazy for that time of year. I mean, and normally the summertime was the best time of year for wrestling anywhere in the country. And when school started back, crowds fell off some, and a lot of places it fell off dramatically. So September was not normally a good month, but that wasn't the case in 1980, man. The three major cities that all got this great card we've been talking about responded almost exactly the same way for the third week in a row. We had record crowds in all three of those markets again, same way it had been for 3 weeks in a row. All three of them were right there at that 16,800 fan capacity with the three combined.
Wow. What do you think was making the crowd so much bigger in September of 80 compared to other years maybe before that?
Geez, this is kind of crazy, but I think it was Ronald Reagan becoming president.
Wow.
He had turned so many things around that Jimmy Carter had done wrong.
I can see that, yeah.
4 years that Carter was there.
Yep.
The economy rocketed. It started taking off. And so well, in 1980, wow, you could tell right in that first year of Reagan's presidency that America is headed into one of its greatest runs. And it truly was. For 8 years of Reagan being there, the country just was phenomenal. Everything was great.
Yeah, I mean, those of us who remember that really do remember the difference that it made flipping into 1980, and here comes Ronald Reagan. All right, so this has been an absolutely awesome Studcast. We've touched on so much in this one, from the hurricane to the Southeastern Knoxville situation to a fantastic card with all the important stuff that you normally point out to us. Everything about these Studcasts is getting better and better week to week, no doubt. So I'm sorry we don't have time for a learning tree question this week, but I don't know how you could have given us any more than what you did on this show, Stud. So what do you have in store for us on the next Studcast other than what happened in the Ricky Gibson and Sweet Brown Sugar incident?
I see you didn't forget that one day.
Not at all.
So I'll answer that question for everybody next week, and I think we want to focus some on Birmingham. We were in September of 1980. We were only 2 months at this point from our very first ever event in the biggest city Southeastern ever had, Birmingham, in its history. So as owners of the company, we were all excited, man, to see what that market there was going to do for our bottom line. And so we'll discuss the kind of the intangibles that were necessary to make sure that we covered all the bases leading up to this opening night there. In fact, we'll talk a little bit about one of our first big names that we're going to put on that first night's card. And that first night's card is going to be the revival of the Alabama State Championship that had been gone, and nobody had recognized the champion in the state of Alabama there for about 10 years. So we're going to have a big tournament. So we're going to talk a little bit about the first big name guy that we put into this tournament that wasn't a part of the normal crew. And then we're going to focus on the next Southeastern card for the week in September, last week in September, 1980. We'll cover the TV show, promote the card, results of the card, the attendances in the three major markets, and hopefully we'll have a chance next week to get a learning tree question in.
Oh, cool deal. All right, folks, you know how to get up with Ron. He's easy to contact on social media, on Facebook. Find Ron at Ron Fuller, the Tennessee Stud. Like and follow him there. Automatically become friends with a living legend. He loves to get your reactions, your comments, and he does his best to respond to every one of those. On Twitter, now known as X also, he's at Ron Fuller Welch. You can follow him there too. Check out the fantastic website. It's called tnstud.com. tnstud.com. This Studcast is going to be there with every Studcast ever done. His Stud Store is where you can get 43 super Studcast, 4 different 8x10 photos, the best-selling novel Brutus, personally autographed to you. You can subscribe to the YouTube channel. Southeastern Rewind. It's the first thing that comes up when you start spelling out that Southeastern on YouTube. Southeastern Rewind. Find hundreds of hours of classic old school wrestling entertainment, 443 total videos, the last 146 Studcast, Ask the Stud shows, and short rides with the Stud. You can go back 1 year or more and discover fantastic Stud stories with worldwide stars, Studcast archive stories, Tell Me More fan question shows, superstars of the past shows, and so much more. It's YouTube Southeastern Rewind. It's the best deal in wrestling. Okay, final comments. That's all you, Stud.
Well, to those that have suffered, man, losses of any kind in the hurricane, God bless you and keep you. May keep you safe. Thanks, everyone, for listening, and hope you enjoyed it. Please join us again next week for another one, and take care of yourselves and others. May God bless us all.
For Ron Fuller in the Great Smoky Mountains of Tennessee, I'm David Summers saying thank you for listening. Find me on Facebook at facebook.com/DSummers with an O, Summers with an O, 955. On Twitter, X, Dave_Doin. On Instagram, it's Instagram.com/David Summers Productions. And hit me up anytime at davidsummersproductions@gmail.com. This Studcast is a David Summers production for Tennessee Stud LLC.
Thanks for joining us today for this historic Studcast. The true story continues next week. So full Nelson your friends and point them in our direction for another ride with the Tennessee Stud.
1, 2, 3.
This is David Summers saying so long from the Great Smoky Mountains.